disgraceful would probably be the word that comes most to my head, whether it's unconstitutional overreach with Doge, jokes about a third term, potentially not jokes, abandoning our ally Ukraine, openly siding with Russia in certain cases. Of course, now, again, we don't know the strategy. Now it's a little more nuanced, but initially, essentially openly siding with Russia, these tariffs, complete economic chaos, division. Actually, I won't say division. Donald Trump is actually starting to unite the American people against his agenda because people are understanding that this is not what America asked for. This is not what America needed at a time when people were worried about their pocketbook, and now we have a situation where it's going to be much more impacted. So I unfortunately would say disgraceful.
Hi, I'm Fergus Macphee and welcome to the Trump Report on Times Radio. Joining me again today is David Hale. He's a contributor to the Reagan Caucus. Thank you very much for coming back on the Trump Report, David.
Thank you, Fergus. Wonderful to be here.
So let's get straight into it with the big news today, and that is that last night the US and Ukraine have finally signed the long-awaited minerals deal. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called it a historic economic partnership, which showed that the administration is committed to a peace process in Ukraine. Now, I should stress that this is not a security guarantee. Some Ukrainian MPs have said that today. But what is your reaction to the deal?
Well, of course, I'm going to be a bit biased, but I'm not a huge fan of the fact that this deal was needed in the first place. I think we should be providing security guarantees to Ukraine for numerous reasons, let alone the fact that we disarmed them their nuclear weapons in 1994. The Budapest Memorandum gave them that security guarantee. We should not be, I think, extorting an ally to try to get a portion of the proceeds of their natural resources in order to potentially provide support to them in the future. So I think, I'm not opposed to the United States making deals with its partners. I'm not opposed to the United States benefiting economically from such a deal, but I am opposed to the lack of security guarantees and the fact that this is much more part of a broader trend of essentially extorting our allies.
So you would say that this is extorting Ukraine? Is this quite a raw deal for Ukraine?
I would say so. I think the fact that if there were some sort of security guarantee, I think we'd be in a different situation and say, okay, this is probably the best we can get under the current administration. But I think with how we're sitting now, I would call it a raw deal.
I've seen some people saying today, since it was signed, that this is the closest we've come to peace. Do you agree with that? And if so, do you think the president deserves some credit?
Well, I don't think peace comes by putting all of the pressure on your ally, putting none of the pressure on the adversary in the situation, and saying that they're the ones who need to make sure that we have peace. They're the ones who need to make sure that we end up in a situation where Russia is satisfied. I think pretty clearly Russia has aims here that are not, they don't want peace. I think even President Trump with his Vladimir stop comment, I think he could even see that clearly the Russians are not partners for peace here in this situation. So I would say putting the emphasis on Ukraine is not the right strategy. I think the real emphasis is, hey, how about Russia? You leave Ukraine.
Well, we do know that Trump has repeatedly been quite critical of the billions of dollars the US has given in aid to Ukraine. How do you think this will play back home, both with Republicans and the wider public, that the US is sort of now getting something in return? Because you're a Republican yourself, is that right?
That's right. That's right. I'm sure the media machine will begin to churn, the right-wing media machine will begin to churn, and I should really say the MAGA media machine will begin to turn and help broker some sort of vision of Trump as a peacemaker here, as the person who is bringing everyone to the table and trying to get something for the United States, because of course we've been ripped off for decades now by supporting our allies. But I think clearly the majority of people, I think most people would understand, without a security guarantee, this is a raw deal for Ukraine, and something that does not benefit the long-term interests of the United States.
I want to move on slightly to the relationship with Vladimir Putin, because I think over the last sort of 3 or 4 days, we've seen the president seemingly change his rhetoric slightly and be a little bit stronger on Putin. Do you think that this is a genuine shift change?
Well, I think it's a bit tragic to go from, the 80s, tear down this wall, calling Russia the evil empire, to now Vladimir stop, and essentially sitting back, putting none of the pressure, but just hoping that they'll come to the table, they'll come and try to be part of this peace process when clearly they don't want to be. I think clearly you would have to apply actual pressure to Russia, increase the sanctions, freeze the assets, do what needs to be done in order to make sure that Russia actually has a stake here, actually has skin in the game, because as of right now, it seems like they don't have any.
You said earlier this week, I think, that in terms of foreign policy, an American president has never been weaker than this one. Have you seen anything in the last 48 hours after this deal and so on that has changed your mind on that?
No, I would say not. I think, again, the extortion of an ally does not strengthen the position of the United States and continues that trend of weakness, I'd say.
The Kremlin hit back as well at the US this week, saying that peace won't come as fast as the US wants. We know that the US has threatened to walk away from agreements. Do you think, is this maybe the start of Russia threatening to walk away as well?
It very well could be. I think the fact that the United States would advertise that to the rest of the world, I think that obviously gives the Russians, in a way, an out by saying, okay, well, clearly we just need to stall this process for a bit longer. We're obviously going to potentially pretend that we're coming to the table or make it seem like we want a deal, but in the long run not get it. I think clearly Putin wants Ukraine, and we're seeing a situation where if they can just wait out the United States, that's what they'll do.
If this is the start of a tone shift, I wanted to ask, is this kind of the latest in a trend of things we're seeing with Donald Trump? He went big on tariffs with the Liberation Day, then rode back on them. The US has obviously just signed that minerals deal, despite that disastrous meeting with Zelensky back in February. Are we sort of seeing a pattern of trying things, seeing if they work, and then changing course later?
Sure. And of course, in principle, there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, we tried this strategy, it didn't work, let's try another strategy. But it doesn't seem as if it's the result of a thoughtful, deliberate process of oh, that didn't work, let's try to change it. It seems much more hand-fisted. I think the goal here is to be as chaotic as possible, to leave essentially everyone on their feet in the United States, theoretically in the position of power, by being willing to turn complete 180s on policy on a dime. I just think that's not good for our relationships with our allies. I don't think that's good for the economy. I don't think that's good for the U.S.'s standing in the world. I think it's you certainly are seeing it. Just it's a flurry of on and off again for so many of these policies, and I think it just goes to that broader strategy of chaos.
And how does that go down with the Republicans that you know?
I will say I've started to see I would say particularly in the last several weeks, I think people are starting to see, and even among conservatives and even among some who voted for Trump this election, are saying, this chaos is not what I expected. This is not what I voted for. I wanted a strong president. I wanted a person with clarity who would go forward and defend the United States abroad. And they're seeing, okay, actually, we're starting to see all these mixed messages, total lack of clarity from the administration, and it's leaving people confused and leaving people not really knowing what's going on. And I think, again, in a way, that's a deliberate strategy from the White House.
I think a lot of people say that it's a deliberate strategy. What is that strategy supposed to achieve?
I think the mind of Donald Trump is an interesting thing. I'll say that much at the start. But in terms of achieving with that strategy, I think it's getting folks to the point where they're so tired, where they're so ready for the chaos to end, that eventually at the end of the road, they say, okay, we'll take whatever deal we can, we'll take whatever policy we can, we'll just accept it, because we're just tired of the whirlwinds of everything going on. Again, I think it's not a wise strategy. I don't think it's good for the United States' standing. I don't think it's good for anybody really. But I would say potentially that's the strategy. But again, I am not a mind reader on Donald Trump. He is a little hard to understand sometimes.
Well, we mentioned the tariffs earlier. And of course, the US economy shrank this week at a rate of 0.3% between January and March. That's the worst performance for 3 years. Now, in response, Donald Trump said that this is Biden's economy. He inherited a mess. I know you had some quite strong thoughts on those comments.
I certainly did. I mean, when you're posting in June of 2024 that this is the Trump economy, when Biden is still president, and now 100 days into your administration, all of a sudden it's Biden's economy again. I think very clearly everybody understands that's not the case. I saw there was a word bubble chart where essentially people were asked what's been Donald Trump's biggest mistake in his first 100 days, and there's just a massive, giant word, tariffs, right in the middle, because that was the response that the vast majority of people gave. I think, the old adage, "Is the economy stupid?" I think it's accurate. It still holds weight to this day. People say, okay, this guy ran on reducing prices, on making things easier for the working class of America, and now he's put in place this policy that's going to do the exact opposite. People see it.
You said to mark the moment that in his 100 days, he's made America weaker, poorer, more chaotic, and less respected. In that case, I mean, will the public, is that the feeling of the public at large, and will they put up with that?
Well, I think certainly the poorer part, people are recognizing that. I think people feel it in their pockets first, and most of all, I think obviously, I would wish that people would be a little more cognizant of the damage he's done to our relationships with our allies. I think that's something that a lot of people here on the right will potentially take some time to have to understand, or understand why it's so important to have those relationships and why it's so important to not act the way this president's acted. But I do think certainly in terms of economics, people, you can feel it in your pocketbook, you see it, you see the instability in the markets, and you understand this is certainly not what I signed up for when I was putting in place a businessman that I thought would turn the economy around.
Well, I've got to say I'm not an economist personally, but I've seen some suggesting in the last sort of 24, 48 hours, this is kind of perhaps unsurprising as it deals with the chaos and the concern around the tariffs. But now that these have been paused and they could even be in retreat, would you expect the economy to bounce back?
I would. The market is quick to react to the situation on the ground. And of course, if that were the case and we decided to walk back the tariffs, I would give the president credit and he would deserve it. But I think as of right now, again, on, off again, we don't know the strategy. And there's no doubt the tariffs are economically detrimental. So as long as they continue to remain that across the board 10%, Americans will feel the effect.
Yeah, no doubt if it does bounce back, that will be Trump's economy.
I will.
I want to move on to talk about something fairly concerning, which I know you're quite passionate about, and that is that the official Trump campaign's website started selling merchandise, including hats and T-shirts with the slogan Trump 2028 on them. That's, of course, forbidden in the US Constitution. How does that make you feel as a Republican?
Well, as a Republican, it makes me quite sad. I'm supposed to be the party of the Constitution and limited government and respecting norms and the rule of law and trying to conserve this system of government that we have. And I think it's really sad to see that housed within the Republican Party and by the leader, the undisputed leader of my party. I think, pretty clearly, some folks say, like, oh, why do people get mad at this? They're just trolling. They're just trying to get reactions out of people. And it's like, well, yes, people will react when you say things that are unconstitutional or say things that are abhorrent. And so that's not an own. That's not oh, we got the libs, we got the never Trumpers. That's the principle of openly defying the Constitution like that. I think it's very sad to see.
The trolling argument is an interesting one because, do you think this is a joke? Or have you heard from anyone that this is something that is genuinely being considered?
Well, of course, you would say, well, obviously it's clearly and explicitly forbidden by the Constitution. There's no way he can do it, so it must be trolling. I think people are willing to make arguments for the indefensible as long as there's enough of an audience for it and as long as there's enough pressure for it. So, I'm sure there'll be somebody who can come up with a legal theory that Donald Trump will amplify and say that, no, actually, I can do it. It is possible it's trolling. If it is, I don't know why you would. And I don't know why we're in a situation where we think, openly defying the Constitution is something that we want to joke with Americans about.
Well, yeah, when you talked about that, he obviously famously said in an interview a few weeks back, an NBC News interview, I think, that there were methods to allow him to run for a third term.
Right.
I wanted to ask, what are the methods and processes in place that would forbid him from standing for a third term?
Well, of course, the 22nd Amendment explicitly saying that no president can serve or any more than 2 consecutive terms, or excuse me, 2 non-consecutive terms, either way, 2 terms in total. You cannot do it. And so the fact that the President of the United States is sitting here saying, oh, there are methods to do it when the Constitution is absolutely crystal clear, I don't know what else there is to say about it. I think it's pretty darn clear that that is not the case.
Okay, so it's forbidden in the Constitution, but if he is serious about this and did try and go ahead, I mean, would that mean prison? I mean, what would be sort of put in place to stop that from happening?
Well, gosh, I mean, I think you would see unrest in this country at a level that we have probably never seen before. If you had a person who was openly defying the Constitution, but trying to get himself on the ballot, and you might even start to see state Republican parties say, nope, yep, we're going to allow Trump to be on the ballot, in the primary or something along those lines. And I think it would be a real crisis in the country. I'm not going to say that it would devolve into any sort of political violence or anything like that. I abhor that. I don't want to see that. But we're put in a state where completely uncharted territory. We don't know. We've never had a president who's this willing to tiptoe right over the line of essentially going into authoritarianism. So.
I want to just finally end on talking about Canada. Obviously, they had their elections earlier this week, and Mark Carney overturned a 25-point deficit in the polls for the Liberals to win the country's election over Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. It very much, at least the media called it, became the Trump election, and it's one that he lost.
I would agree. I would certainly agree. When you have the Conservative Party leading by double digits for more than a year in the polling in Canada, and then all of a sudden at the end of January 2025, you see the Liberal support absolutely skyrocket and obviously shoot past the Conservatives in the end, and they get their minority government. But of course, they weren't expecting to be having a government at all. So we're in a situation where I think it's pretty darn undeniable that Donald Trump is the cause of the Conservatives' loss in Canada.
Yeah, and we've got the Australian election also coming up. I think it's this weekend, and we've seen sort of something similar there. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen yet, but there has been a Labour surge, I think, since the tariff announcement. Are we sort of entering a period now where we could see other countries almost vote against Donald Trump?
I would say so, yes. And, of course, I wish we would have done it here, but, they'll do it in other places. And, I posted a message the other day just saying Donald Trump is the biggest enemy of conservatives worldwide, because I think he is. Clearly, for conservative parties around the world, they're looking and saying, most of them are saying, we want nothing to do with this guy. We're not this guy. We believe in our own sovereignty. We want to defend our economy. We know that these tariffs are detrimental. We know that we should be in a much better relationship with our allies than the United States wants to be in with theirs. And so I think, yes, Donald Trump is essentially kryptonite for the right wing around the world.
You said you wished the US didn't vote for President Trump. I know your X handle is Concerned Republican. I wanted to ask you, who are the kind of maybe rising stars at the moment in the Republican Party that you might like to see lead in the future?
I might like to see. I'll certainly say one, and of course, as a rising star, he's actually potentially considering retirement, but he's not 100% sure. Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska's 2nd District, I think, is a person who's been very, very vocal in the past several months, particularly regarding Ukraine and the tariffs and obviously presidential overreach in terms of using that authority to wield economic warfare against the rest of the world. I think he's great. Honestly, there's not a ton of folks rising in the Republican Party who I'm terribly hopeful about at the moment, though I will say I do live in the state of Georgia. I'm quite fond of our Republican governor here, Brian Kemp, as somebody who has implemented conservative policies throughout his entire tenure, but also has shown a willingness and an ability to stand up to Donald Trump and actually be rewarded for it electorally. So I'm quite fond of him, and of course, there's a chance he might run for Senate here in Georgia in 2026, and I would support him in that case. So there are pockets of hope around the country, but overall, obviously, the Republican Party is in the grip of Donald Trump at the moment.
And just finally, we've seen this week, I think it was Tuesday, was the 100 days. How would you describe Trump's 100 days in his second term in office?
I think disgraceful would probably be the word that comes most to my head, whether it's unconstitutional overreach with Doge, jokes about a third term, potentially not jokes, abandoning our ally Ukraine, openly siding with Russia in certain cases. Of course, now, again, we don't know the strategy. Now it's a little more nuanced, but initially, essentially openly siding with Russia, these tariffs, complete economic chaos, division. Actually, I won't say division. Donald Trump is actually starting to unite the American people against his agenda because people are understanding that this is not what America asked for. This is not what America needed at a time when people were worried about their pocketbook, and now we have a situation where it's going to be much more impacted. So I unfortunately would say disgraceful, and I think there's room for him to improve. I'm not, people love to say I have TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, but I would say I have Trump reality syndrome. I see what he does, and I see the chaos that is a result of it. If he decided to change course and do better, I think he would deserve all the credit in the world. You
mentioned about uniting the American people there. I know there were quite a few polls at the start of the week where it sort of said that for approval rating, at least, Donald Trump is the most unpopular president in his first 100 days in office. But then there was, as part of the poll as well, they asked, who would you rather prefer in Congress, Republicans or the Democrats? And Republicans still win that. So I guess if you're the Trump team, you're looking at that and you say, well, there's still no one to challenge us.
Likely the case. And I think that can largely be explained by people saying, well, yes, the Republican Party, the economic policies that they would put forward would generally be ones that we would support and we think would be able to get us in a better situation. It's just not what you're seeing from the president. So I think this truly is an opportunity. If he wanted, he could actually rally the American people, put forward popular conservative policies. But instead, obviously, we're not seeing that. And instead, we have this economic warfare with the tariffs.
And really is finally this time. We've had the first 100 days. What do you foresee for the next 100 days?
Well, I think you'll continue to see more economic chaos as we potentially have on and off tariff deals, potentially with other countries for the next 100 days. I think you'll continue to see Russia butcher Ukrainians and come to the table and walk away from the table and come to the table and walk away from the table. And the United States, again, eventually may walk away from standing by its ally Ukraine. I hope things turn around. I hope that those around Donald Trump, which we know he's not always one for taking advice, but I hope they're able to speak to the better angels of his character and let him know, the American people aren't asking for this. They aren't wanting this. Please understand the reality of the polling. Don't deny it. Don't pretend it's not real. Accept it and change course. And if he does, again, he deserves the credit.
David Hale, thank you so much for joining us once again on the Trump Report today.
Thank you, Fergus.